Now, if I know what I'm doing, which I should do by now, hopefully I'm now sharing my screen with you all. Someone needs to tell me if that's not actually happening, but I think that's what's happening. And I'm just having a slight problem getting it to work. Hopefully, yes, there we go. So I'm Colin MacDonald, and I'm the Community Housing Advisor working to the Wessex Community Housing Hub. And this is a whistle-stop tour of the main types of community-led housing. So a couple of caveats to start with, and that is that most community-led housing schemes are unique in some way or other. And so this is only an attempt to pigeonhole them into types. And the second thing is that they're not completely mutually exclusive. So I'm going to start with community land trusts. I'm going to start with community land trusts because that's what Wessex is most famous for, I guess, having very successfully promoted community land trust schemes across 3 counties over the past couple of decades. So what is it? Well, it's something that I'd say passes the Ronseal test, as in it does what it says on the tin. It's a trust that holds land for the benefit of the community, and that's what we what we commonly call the asset log, making sure that that land and any buildings on it are not dissipating into private ownership or into some other in some other way getting away from community control. And that really is all there is to it. A community land trust tends to be run by a group of volunteers. And here's our example, which is the nearest community land trust to where I am at the moment. This is Norton sub Hamden. And what you can see here are 10 houses on the right, which were built and run by Yarlington Housing. And they are built on land which is owned by the Norton sub Hamden Community Land Trust. And on the left, you can see the shop and post office, which the Community Land Trust stepped in and took over the running of when it was in danger of closing. And so the unique feature of the Community Land Trust model is that it doesn't just have to be about housing. The Community Land Trust can be used for other projects, and probably shop and post office is the most popular amongst other non-housing projects that Community Land Trusts do, but really the limits are only those of your own imaginations. Next, I want to say a few words about cooperative housing. And really, I guess it stands to reason that as a non-profit organisation, they're based on democratic membership. Basically, they're collectively managing the housing for their members. So most housing co-ops, or a lot of housing co-ops, are fully mutual. So to be a tenant, you need to be a member. And to be a member, you need to be a tenant or a prospective tenant. But otherwise, that's the only thing that all housing co-ops have got in common, because it's really about the democratic control. And if you like, it's the purest form of democratic control as far as the residents are concerned, because literally the people who make the decisions are the ones that have to live with the consequences. Otherwise, housing co-ops could almost be anything. Some own the homes that they manage. Some lease them from another organisation, so that could be a housing association. And some actually managing properties that belong to a different landlord. And in fact, they may be tenants of that other landlord, such as a local council and tenant management organisation. So housing cooperatives cover a multitude of different in that sense. And I want to talk about co-housing, which is I guess, a form of cooperative in a way. And what we often say about co-housing schemes is they're intentional communities. So they're created and run by the residents. It's possible that they could have mixed tenures. They don't have to be all one tenure. And usually each household has their own self-contained space, but there may be some communal space and often what common house where people can spend time collectively. So a common example is sharing meals. And this is a photograph of the Threshold Centre in Gillingham in Dorset, which I guess is the nearest completed co-housing scheme to where I'm sitting at the moment. And that was developed with a housing association, which has since merged to become part of ASTA, the ASTA Housing Association Group. Mutual home ownership is a kind of another variation. And here it's possible for people with intermediate income to an equity stake The residents form a mutual home ownership society, and they own and manage the home, and it kind of has a collective mortgage. Mortgage probably isn't the right word for it, but effectively that's what it is. And residents pay towards the costs, usually based on household incomes. So the example I got to mind is a scheme called Lilac in Leeds, which, if I remember correctly, the residents there are expected to pay 35% of their household income. And now I want to touch on group self-build. So, self-build could be undertaken by individuals, but you're Mr. and Mrs. Self-builder on your own. Probably you don't need a community housing hub, you need Tunnel 4. But for people who want to do it collectively, then it could be a community-led housing scheme. And again, a huge variation here. Self-builders might undertake most of the work or possibly just some of it. So usually there are some contractors used for at least some elements. And one variation is what we call self-finish. So your sort of normal building contractors bring properties up to waterproof, weather type condition, and then self-builders go in and do fixtures and fittings and the property off. Now, it's sometimes organised by another body. So sometimes you have a housing association, for example, running a self-build scheme. And one of the side effects of this is it can be used as a training scheme. So the members not only are building their own houses, but also developing practical skills which they can use elsewhere. But in all cases, the costs are reduced by what we call sweat equity. So the amount of labour that someone's put in has actually cut the occupation cost at some point in the future. And in an ownership scheme, well, that could be actually reducing the cost of producing the property. In a tenanted scheme, it could be a reduced rent as a reflection of sweat equity that the tenant. But otherwise, the key thing is that a self-build group could be a cooperative, they could be a community land trust. In that sense, they're not really a legal type of community land housing. Self-build is really a method of getting to whatever your legal structure is, your final product. Finally, I want to mention almshouses. And this is a picture of Sir Edward's Hex almshouses in Somerton. Now, almshouses have been around for ages, and the earliest is thought to date back to 990. Unfortunately, they've only got documentary evidence going back to the 13th century, but I think that's long enough. Often they're gifted by a patron. And you may know of an almshouse trust in your area. What you might not know is that nationally there are 1,600 of them, and that collectively almshouses manage about 35,000 properties, if I remember correctly. So as a sector, almshouses are probably the same size as a medium-sized housing association. And an almshouse trust could be renovating or refurbishing existing building, or it could be moving residents into a purpose-built new building. It could be expanding and creating new homes alongside the old. So for anyone who's out there who's thinking about doing a new community-led housing scheme in your own area, I'd say it's definitely worth checking if there isn't already an existing almshouse trust that's there, intended for the same particular beneficiaries. And that's the end of my whistle-stop tour. And now I'm going to hand over to our guest speaker for today,